Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Li Jianhua. Welcome to the program. Our top stories. Dozens killed in the latest strikes in Gaza as the Israeli military expands its ground offensive, targeting Palestinian refugee camps. Violence in the West Bank. Several people killed in an Israeli drone strike, as at least a dozen Palestinians are detained in overnight raids. Rising inflation and higher energy costs. How the ongoing conflict in Ukraine is affecting Europe's largest economy. And we take a look back at the extreme weather of 2023, a year expected to be the hottest on record. Israeli forces continue to target central Gaza by land, sea and air, following a warning that its war on Hamas will last for months to come. Palestinian authorities say the death toll has now surpassed 21,000, with nearly 200 people killed in the last 24 hours. A wave of attacks targeted refugee camps in central Gaza, with heavy fighting also reported in the south. The World Health Organization says there are now no functioning hospitals in the north of the enclave. And now let's get to the view from Israel. Our correspondent Trent Murray is in Tel Aviv. So Trent, great to see you there. So while Israel continues its offensive in Gaza, the IDF is also taking action in West Bank. So what can you tell us?
Yeah, that's right. There's been a lot of violence flare within the West Bank since October 7th. Palestinian sources there say that 300 people have been killed and around 4,700 Palestinians have been arrested. The latest incident follows a night of quite significant violence there. We have seen a terrorist, or an anti-terror raid, according to the IDF, on the Ner Shams refugee camp. Now, it was there that there was an airstrike launched from a drone by the IDF. 6 Palestinians were killed. What Palestinian sources on the ground, including the Palestinian Red Crescent, are saying is that the 6 Palestinians that died were young men aged 16 to 29 that had come out to see the raid take place. Now, the IDF has refuted that claim, saying that the men opened fire on those IDF troops and threw grenades, which is why that airstrike was launched, but it is a spotlight on an issue which is not necessarily getting as much attention as Gaza, but it is one that is very much alive for the people living in the West Bank. These raids have taken place on a near nightly basis. Aside from that situation at the refugee camp we also understand the Israelis launched raids in Bethlehem, Jenin, Hebron and Tubas. It is one of those issues that has got a lot of diplomats worried, both Israel's allies and others in the region, that the situation in Gaza could spill over further into the West Bank and there could be more bloodshed, which is why there is a real call for restraint from a lot of Israel's partners, including the US and the EU, around how it conducts its operations within that West Bank area.
Well, Trent, it's not just in Gaza or the West Bank. It seems like that Israel is fighting on all fronts, and concerns are growing that the conflict actually could impact more regions in the Middle East.
Yeah, look, it certainly feels that way, doesn't it? That the risk of miscalculation or escalation just continues to grow. I mean, the Defence Minister here, Yoav Gallant, has spoken about how Israel is fighting this war on 7 fronts, was how he described it. We know the situation in Lebanon remains very tense. Hezbollah has claimed responsibility for firing 17 rockets into northern Israel, the IDF responding with a wave of airstrikes and artillery strikes. We also, of course, are getting some more reaction out of Iran following that Israeli strike on the Syrian capital, Damascus, in which a senior Iranian Revolutionary Guard commander was killed. Tehran is saying Israel will pay a, quote, very heavy price for that action. And then also in the Red Sea, things remain very difficult. We understand, according to the US Navy, that 17 kamikaze drones and ballistic missiles were shot down by warships and F-18 Super Hornets, which have been deployed to the region to try and safeguard those vital shipping lanes. The Yemen-based Houthi rebels have claimed responsibility for that, and it comes as the US and the UK and others move naval assets to that region to try and safeguard those shipping lanes. It seems that huge show of naval force, though, has not deterred the Houthis from continuing those rocket attacks.
Thanks, Trent. That is our correspondent, Trent Murray, in Tel Aviv. And now let's talk to our correspondent, Noor Harazin, in central Gaza. So, Noor, great to see you there. And we see that the death toll in Gaza is climbing. So tell us about the latest attacks.
Well, yes, let's start with the latest here where I am. I am inside the Al-Aqsa Hospital, which is located in Deir al-Balah in Middle Gaza. And since the very early hours of this morning, continuous Israeli shelling and bombing on the eastern side of Al-Bureij refugee camp, where dozens of people were injured and they were transferred here to this hospital, to the Al-Aqsa Hospital. The Palestinian medical sources are talking actually about dozens of people that were killed and injured during the day. However, due to the fact that there were no communication, no network, no internet over the past hours, the paramedics did not manage to reach and evacuate all of those people that were affected by the Israeli bombings over the past 24 hours. Talking about southern Gaza, specifically in Khan Yunis, a number of people were killed. Palestinian medical sources said that 6 people actually were killed just an hour ago in an Israeli strike that hit a group of people that were trying to buy some bread from a vendor in the street. Also, dozens were reported injured. Also, in one of the highlights that happened today, the Israeli army delivered the bodies of 80 Palestinians through the Kerem Abu Salem border between Gaza and Israel. Doctors that in Rafah that received the bodies of those that were killed weeks ago in northern Gaza, and the Israeli forces confiscated their bodies. They said that they did not manage to ID the 80 bodies because they were decomposed and because the Israeli army did not offer any IDs on these people. These 80 bodies were buried in a mass grave in Rafah.
So we have heard from the World Health Organization in Rafah that they describe the Gaza's hospitals as a bloodbath.
Well, yes. I mean, I've been here in Shuhada Al-Aqsa Hospital, in one of the last operating hospitals actually in Gaza. I have been here for 2 months now, and I saw it. I saw how the situation is just going from bad to worse. It is dire, deteriorating humanitarian situation in the hospital. Not only talking about the lack of medicine and medical supplies and fuel inside the hospital, but also because the hospitals here in Gaza have turned into a shelter for thousands of Palestinians that have actually nowhere to go. So they are seeking shelter inside the hospitals. This is just a statement coming from the WHO coordinator in Gaza.
We've seen children, women, young men, old men and women, people bleeding out. At the same time yesterday at Al-Aqsa, I saw a woman who had multiple gunshot wounds. An attempt was made to refer her, and she was referred back because she was bleeding so heavily. So, I mean, there's blood everywhere in these hospitals at the moment. We're seeing almost only trauma cases come through the door, and at a scale that's quite difficult to believe. It's a bloodbath.
And actually, there is many stories to be told every day. We are seeing and we are witnessing and living through here in the hospital. And we have seen this over the past weeks. I mean, doctors are treating patients and operating on people on the floors. Paramedics in some cases are leaving those injured on the front gate of the hospital because actually there is no place inside the hospital. We journalists and the doctors did not know where to step inside the hospital because of the big number of people injured on the floor of the hospital. So yes, it is catastrophic inside. The situation is catastrophic inside the hospitals in Gaza.
Thanks, Noor. That is our correspondent, Noor Harazin, in central Gaza. Yemen's Houthi rebels say they have carried out drone attacks targeting the Israeli port of Eilat and other areas in the country. The attacks are a show of support for Palestinians. At least 8 multinational shipping and oil firms have rerouted their vessels away from the Red Sea. But there are widespread concerns about the impact on global supply chains. Adel El-Marouki has more.
When a gigantic shipping vessel blocked the Suez Canal in 2021, it hugely disrupted the flow of global trade. Many ships got stuck in the channel. The blockage caused losses amounting to some $10 billion. Fears are growing that a similar situation is imminent after many firms diverted their ships away from the Red Sea following increased attacks by Yemen's Houthi rebels.
There is global economic instability. Egypt is facing shortages of foreign currencies, which makes any impact on the Suez Canal a huge problem. Given that it's the most important waterway in the world, it will have a consequence on Egypt's foreign currency earnings. Supply chains would be greatly impacted as shipping time and costs increase.
8 shipping firms are avoiding the Red Sea route, fearing further attacks on their vessels. 12 more say they're considering a longer route all around Africa to the Suez Canal. The U.S. is leading an international coalition that deployed naval forces in the region to avoid further attacks on ships by Houthis, who have said they will target vessels heading to Israel. Some Egyptian experts say the situation can be contained.
The Houthis are not targeting all vessels, only those that carry the Israeli flags and the ships heading to Israel. Any other ship is not threatened. In addition, the US-led forces are controlling the region and protecting navigation and trade vessels. This creates assurances and establishes security, so all other Red Sea countries will not be affected.
The route through the Cape of Good Hope in southern Africa is 40% longer for vessels connecting Asia with Europe, compared to the one through Egypt's Suez Canal. That not only adds 10 extra days to regular shipping time, but it also decreases the effective capacity of vessels by 25% and increases the cost of shipments as more fuel and manpower is needed.
After some of the world's biggest shipping firms announced avoiding the Red Sea, oil prices increased by about $2 a barrel. So far, the Suez Canal Authority says that only dozens of ships have rerouted, which is somewhat an insignificant number compared to the more than 2,000 ships that cross the canal every month. However, if the rerouting is sustained, the impact on Egypt and the world trade will grow. Adel El-Marouki, CGTN, Cairo.
Japanese authorities are preparing to restart the world's largest atomic power plant after the country's nuclear power regulator lifted a ban. The Kashiwakaze Kariwa plant has been offline since the 2011 Fukushima disaster, which prompted a shutdown of all nuclear power plants. The switching on of TEPCO's massive power plant will still need the approval of the local prefecture. China posted double-digit industrial profits in November after an uptick in manufacturing. Profits rose 29.5% compared with 2.7% in October. Overall, industrial earnings shrank 4.4% in the first 11 months of this year compared to 2022. China is expected to achieve its growth target of around 5% this year. Drug maker AstraZeneca is set to make one of its first acquisitions in China, its second largest market after the US. The company has announced the plans to buy Gracell Biotechnologies for $1.2 billion. Shanghai-based Gracell is working on innovative cell therapies. AstraZeneca says the move will increase its investment in cancer treatment. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. How Greece is recovering after last summer's devastating wildfires, as 2023 looks set to be the hottest year on record.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? grey rhinos, and unicorn companies. Make sense of it all with global business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us. And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. Dozens killed in the latest strikes in Gaza as the Israeli military expands its ground offensive, targeting Palestinian refugee camps. And violence in the West Bank, several people killed in an Israeli drone strike, as at least a dozen Palestinians are detained in overnight raids. At least 2 people have been killed in the southern Ukrainian region of Kherson following a Russian drone attack. Kherson is under constant attack from Russian forces entrenched in new positions east of the Dnieper River. Elsewhere, the commander of Ukraine's armed forces has rejected Russian claims that they now control the eastern town of Marinka. Months of fighting have left the town in ruins. The conflict between Ukraine and Russia has had a huge impact on the global economy, contributing to rising inflation and higher energy costs. Europe's largest economy, Germany, was hit particularly hard. Our correspondent Natalie Carney reports.
It's no secret that the conflict in Ukraine has weakened economies across the European Union. In many ways, Germany has been affected more than others. In 2022, the first year of the conflict, Germany's GDP shrank by around 1.8% compared to 2021. And this year, it is expected to shrink by 0.3% as high inflation and rising interest rates take their toll on the economy.
There is a massive cost for Germany for a number of reasons. High dependence on gas, oil and coal from Russia. The impact on energy costs, slowing demand in Europe, lower exports for Germany, then of course confidence. Companies investing less, consumers consuming less because of very high inflation.
Energy prices increased dramatically in 2022 as the country quickly diverted imports away from Russia to other, more expensive suppliers, while inflation hit nearly 8%. But federal subsidies of around $44 billion have since helped bring those numbers down. In addition, Berlin has initiated a $110 billion defense budget to help beef up a historically underfunded army, while also helping fund Ukraine's own defense.
A giant Ukrainian flag was hoisted here in front of Munich's Palace of Justice just in the early days of the conflict as a symbol of Germany's support for justice in Ukraine. Yet Germany's support extends far beyond just that. Berlin is the second largest financial contributor to Ukraine's defense after the U.S.
Earlier this month, Germany's coalition government resolved a budget crisis that maintained the allowance to increase support for Ukraine next year. Since the start of the conflict, Germany has spent nearly $8.5 billion on military assistance to Ukraine and has budgeted for a further $11.5 billion in the coming years. Should more be needed, Chancellor Olaf Scholz has said the government would seek an exemption from borrowing limits.
If the situation worsens as a result of Russia's war against Ukraine, for example, because the situation on the front deteriorates, or because other supporters reduce their aid to Ukraine, or because the threat to Germany and Europe continues to increase, then we will have to react.
Millions has also been spent to support Ukrainian refugees in Germany.
So there are about 1.2 million Ukrainian refugees in Germany today. More are likely to come. Also that has seen a spending of close to 10 billion euros on living expenses, on housing, on language courses, helping them to integrate.
While these economic measures have not stopped the German economy from falling into recession, they are, arguably, saving it from a deeper one and keeping Germany safe. Natalie Carney for CGTN in Munich.
And the conflict is not without its economic burden on Russia. But as Jamie Shear, a former NATO spokesperson and now senior fellow at the think tank Friends of Europe, told CGTN, President Vladimir Putin is showing no signs of backing down.
Russia wins by not losing. Putin is clearly in for the long haul. He made that clear during his press conference. He said that the initial Russian war aims, which is to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine, have not changed. So that suggests that Putin is not prepared at this stage, at least, to go for a more limited victory in terms of simply hanging on to the 17% of Ukraine that Russia has occupied and gaining full control of those 4 provinces that the Russian parliament last year annexed or claims to have annexed from Ukraine. I mean, Putin seems to want the whole lot, including obviously the downfall of the Zelensky regime. He's pushed through the Russian Duma a massive 62% increase in the Russian defense budget. Russia, believe it or not, is now spending as a proportion of its GDP more on defense than the Soviet Union did. Soviet Union 14%, Russia now 20%. And clearly, in terms of production, in terms of getting weapons from North Korea, Iran and so on, Putin shows every sign of, meaning that as long as it takes, maybe in a way that the West no longer means its own sort of commitment to, as long as it takes. So there's no signs yet that the Russian domestic front, the Russian economy is beginning to crack. Economists say that, of course, all of this defense spending over the long run is going to cause a lot of inflation, reduce Russian living standards. But, Putin has got a pretty tight regime there in terms of clamping down on dissent. So, yes, it will bite eventually, but it will probably be, in Putin's view at least, bite long after he's won his victory in Ukraine.
As scientists in Europe say 2023 is set to be the hottest year on record. In the Mediterranean region, there have been extreme heat waves and wildfires, as well as drought and floods. Our correspondent Evangelos Sipsas reports from Greece.
It's been 4 months since the devastating wildfires in Greece, and parts of the country are still recovering. North of Athens, pensioner Kleanthis is resuming work on his house, a house that took him over 10 years to build. He spent his life savings with the hope of passing the home on to his grandchildren one day. But after it was destroyed by the flames, he's afraid that day might not come.
I don't know what my future looks like. I can't make any plans after what happened to me. I'm 75 years old. The only thing I hope for is for my grandchildren to have a better life. I had a hard life. I don't want them to go through what I went through. I'm sorry I'm getting emotional.
Last summer, multiple fires broke out in Greece, burning through forests and destroying hundreds of houses and businesses. Fueled by unusually high temperatures, the country was burning from its northern border to the southern island of Rhodes, where the wildfires forced a mass exodus of tourists and locals. And while smoke was still in the air, floods. In September, central Greece was hit by Storm Daniel, the most powerful storm the country has ever seen. Over a meter of rain fell in 48 hours, flooding most of the Thessaly region. Scientists say this event happens once every 1,000 years, but climate change is happening faster than they expected.
The one thing that the scientific community agrees on is that the extreme weather phenomena that we thought we would experience, say 30 years from now, are already happening. We are seeing now an increase in the number of heat waves and their intensity, and as a result, longer periods of drought.
2023 was a record-breaking year when it came to extreme weather conditions. First, the extreme heat waves and wildfires that were the worst that the country has seen in 20 years. Then, the floods that happened once every 1,000 years. And the continuous problem of drought. With the water levels at the lowest ever, scientists are warning that if temperatures in winter continue to stay as high, then we're in for another difficult year.
This past year, we have reached the minimum reserves we have ever recorded. It was a very dry year, unusual for Greece, and that's because we didn't have rain or snow during the winter. So far this December has been warm. If it stays this way throughout the winter, then we need an emergency plan to deal with it.
Recent flooding could give a false impression, but despite the storms, groundwater levels remain low. The Greek government is planning a tax rebate to those affected by extreme weather conditions. But scientists say it would only scratch the surface of the problem, a problem that they have sounded the alarm about by saying no one is listening. Evangelos Sepsas for CGTN, Athens.
Parts of Australia have begun cleaning up after a series of storms that killed at least 10 people. A 9-year-old girl swept away by floodwater was among those killed over the festive period as strong winds, hailstones and torrential rain affected eastern states. Tens of thousands of residents have been left without power. More rain is forecast, though the wild weather is expected to ease across the region. Flight and rail passengers have been left stranded in New Delhi after a dense fog enveloped India's capital and forced services to close. Authorities say the fog contains pollutants and the city's residents have been warned to limit their exposure. Poor air quality is also affecting other parts of northern India. China's electric vehicle giant BYD says it has obtained a conditional testing license for autonomous driving on high-speed roads. The company was granted permits in July, making it the first automaker in the country to gain such a license. Earlier this month, BMW and Mercedes-Benz also received authorization to test their autonomous cars in Shanghai and Beijing. And our top stories again. Dozens killed in the latest strikes in Gaza as the Israeli military expands its ground offensive, targeting Palestinian refugee camps. Violence in the West Bank. Several people killed in an Israeli drone strike, as at least a dozen Palestinians are detained in overnight raids. And as the year draws to a close, scientists warn 2023 is likely to be the hottest on record. And that is the world today. Thanks for watching. There is more news on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next is World Insight with Tian Wei. For now, from all the team in London, that's goodbye.
It's home to the Thayer's leaf monkey, the great hornbill, the ancient salt tree Shorea